we're going to go ahead and start this meeting as a working session because we don't have a quorum. So welcome one and all to the November meeting of the Ann Arbor Energy Commission. And we'll call the roll.
Commissioner Paleg.
Here.
Commissioner Mirsky.
Here.
Commissioner Clevey.
Here.
Commissioner Appleyard.
Here.
And new member, Commissioner Jameson, welcome.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, welcome.
And yeah, I don't know if you're welcome to say a word or two. You certainly don't have to, though, but we really appreciate your interest, and we'll look forward to getting to know you over the next months and years, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to being part of the commission, so. Leave it at
Welcome.
that. Excited to dig in.
Approval of the agenda. Does anyone want to add anything to the agenda? Subtract anything? We consider that approved?
We'll have to
I'm
wait
not
on
sure
the
we
minutes,
can
I think.
officially approve or disapprove anything.
No, that's not, I'm just
Right.
declaring
Oh,
it
yeah, you're
approved.
declaring, oh, yeah, okay, good, right, got it.
I'll give a brief update on the clean and renewable energy resolution.
Okay.
So,
Do you want to just do that in the report section, John?
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
I was
Okay.
thinking that.
Right.
Yeah.
That sounds good. And does anyone have any changes that they'd like to suggest to the minutes from the last meeting?
We can't approve those.
Which we can't approve, but we could talk about it.
We could talk.
We can talk about it.
So, seeing none, we'll not approve the minutes and move on to public input, which I think we can have even though it's a working session. So
Yes.
if anybody in the audience wants to say anything,
Oh.
or officially, since we
We're
now have a
about to-
quorum.
We now have a quorum.
Welcome.
You got to recall the order. Recall the meeting to order.
Okay, so now at 12 minutes after 6, I will call this meeting to order as an official non-working session meeting for the Ann Arbor Energy Commission. So, moving right along.
do we need to do a new roll
We
call?
do new roll call.
Do we?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Call the roll again.
Welcome again, Commissioner Jameson. Are you present?
Here.
Commissioner Paleg.
Here.
Commissioner Mirsky.
Present.
Commissioner Clevey.
Here.
Commissioner Appleyard.
Still here.
Commissioner Levin.
Here now.
Thank you. Anyone want to add anything to the minutes? If not, I'll ask for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Approval of the minutes. Anyone want to add anything to the minutes from last meeting? If not, I'll call for an order to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion approved. We still have a public, and apparently no one wants to speak, so we'll close the first public input session. There is one at the end in case you get encouraged during the meeting and want to add something. Energy report.
Yes, so, a couple quick things here. It was sent around, but I wanted to offer a reminder on some upcoming public meetings for the draft solar ordinance, impacting ground-mounted solar and other things. So, first thing, the website to go to for information, including full text of the ordinance, which was worked on in a joint meeting with the Energy Commission and Planning Commission, is at a2gov.org/departments/planning. And at the lower left, there's a solar ordinance link under all the links affiliated with planning. So just look for the solar ordinance link there at that site. But the meetings are Thursday, November 16th, so that's this week, from 6 to 7:30. That's the time for all three meetings, and it's at the Ann Arbor Senior Center at 1320 Baldwin Avenue. The second meeting is Tuesday, November 28th, also at 6 p.m. at the Ann Arbor District Library Westgate Branch at 2503 Jackson Avenue. And the third is Thursday, November 30th at Clague Middle School, also from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Encourage you to attend and look at for more information on the site that I gave. If there's any other questions. I did want to share, there is a public, and this is mostly for commissioners, the PSC is seeking comment for EV work up through now, through the 17th of this month, for pilot ideas for investor-owned utilities and others. I'm going to send around some more information about this. Staff is going to be organizing some comments, but certainly individually encourage folks to do that, or if you have any ideas you'd want to impart, please respond to that message that I'll be sending out as the comments are coming due soon. And pertinent to our first presentation, which is an electric vehicle charging related project. So we'll send some more info on that probably tomorrow. That's it for me.
I should remind people that the audio system in the building here isn't working, so speak up so that people in the audience can hear.
Thank you.
Other items?
John
The
had this piece.
resolution update.
Yes.
So as a reminder, the Energy Commission approved a resolution calling on City Council to direct the city to commit to moving to 100% clean and renewable energy for all city operations by 2035. And we did that in September after working on that for several months. Since then, there was an email exchange where the administrator expressed some concerns, particularly regarding purchased materials. He specifically mentioned, for example, asphalt and Portland cement used in road construction, and also he was concerned about converting heavy equipment and vehicles that are powered by gasoline engines, and felt that they may not be able to be converted by 2035. So I put together some new language and ran that by Mark and Wayne and Nate, and proposed that in an email back to the administrator. I also talked to him before that, and he has now approved the new language, and so we are waiting for feedback from Councilman Smith whether or not he would sponsor and take the resolution to council. I'm guessing that he will, given his past association with this commission. The change in the wording basically limited the definition of city operations to what are called Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions or boundaries. Those are emissions that come directly from city activities and those that come from electricity and potentially other power sources for heating and air conditioning buildings and things like that, but eliminates all purchased materials, meaning pencils and paper or asphalt and Portland cement or anything that a contractor would do. And that is typical for this kind of resolution. And I think, as stated in the email, that was always our intent when we passed the resolution. It wasn't that we expected the city to go after every single vendor that it has and ensure that they are powered by clean and renewable energy. So we now have a path forward, and hopefully we will see action by City Council on that soon.
Great.
Just a comment. I think that's a great resolution, and we should move forward. And at the same time, I think we shouldn't lose sight of the possibility of requiring vendors to use biofuels or something like that in the future, and make that part of the bidding process.
Yep.
That the vendors have, green, green operations themselves, or et cetera. So perhaps that's something we can look at in the future.
Agree fully, and
around
there's,
that.
as we know, because I think it was presented in my absence or discussed when I missed the last meeting, the city has a new environment, what is it called? Procurement policy?
Yeah.
Environmentally preferred procurement
Oh,
policy.
there you go.
Yes, so that would directly
Right.
address those kinds of things, whether it's products or services, that we would then, through that policy, push vendors to also become cleaner and move to renewables.
Does it make sense to link this resolution to that policy, at least in mentioning it?
The only thing that is in here, which was something that we don't specifically mention that policy, but we do say that we will use a combination of energy efficiency, renewable energy sources, and optimal business practices. So,
Sounds good.
which is sort of all
Covers
encompassing.
it, yeah.
Includes things like the green fleets policy and everything like that.
Yeah, excellent.
Well, as an aside, tomorrow evening, there will be a YouTube presentation by Elon Musk of their new semi-tractor-trailer,
Yeah.
all-electric vehicle. So I think we'll find that things will move to electric a little faster
faster.
than some people believe.
Yes.
So
Driverless, I'm sure, probably, right?
probably scarily. They say that some of the first ones they're gonna do are, and this isn't Tesla, but actually tractor-trailers,
yeah.
where the first one has somebody driving it, and there's one that doesn't have anybody in it following it, which
Right.
scares me personally, but anyways, other energy news? Hearing none, we'll move on to a DDA solar carport project presentation by Dave Conkle and Susan Pillay. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. We have a PowerPoint somehow. There
Okay.
needs to be a fancy button pushed.
There we go. So while the screens are unfolding, I'll give a short overview for those that are listening in the home audience. DDA is fairly well known in this town, but primarily as the folks who run the parking system. What may be much less well known is how extensively the DDA has pursued sustainability projects in order to meet our mission. An example have been the grants. For instance, the DDA was the funder for the solar panels at the farmers market. The DDA provided grants for a number of years for free energy audits for downtown buildings. We worked to make the underground garage as sustainable as possible. For instance, the aggregate from the site was reused in the concrete. We have 100% stormwater capture, LED lights, and EV units. The DDA has been pursuing sustainability because a part of their vision of how to meet a mission is we should be developing our downtown as an Ann Arbor downtown. That is who we are. With a chance encounter with the city administrator last spring, we got to talking about solar and what we could do with the garages. So we commissioned a study from our engineers on the garages to see what we could do in terms of adding solar to the tops. What they came back with was, not unsurprisingly, a very expensive retrofit. These are garages built, in some cases, such as Maynard and 4th and William, they were built in the 50s. They weren't designed for this. And what we were looking at, in essence, was adding essentially a roof on top which the panels could sit. The cost, the preliminary cost estimates, these are 2018 dollars, ranged from $1.9 million at 4th and Washington to almost $8 million at Maynard. So then we asked the engineers to take a different look. What could we do if we did a partial coverage? The costs that they came back with were probably closer to about $750,000. So working with Dave, whom many of you know, we asked ourselves if we could have a pilot project where we could learn how this could work right here on the ground, which is an easier place to learn than up on the garages, to understand how we interconnect with DTE, to understand how the building actually works. And so with that, Dave was commissioned by the DDA. We've approved funding for a project. And today we're going to talk about what that project could look like. And we're actively pursuing. In fact, today we met to go through some of the RFP responses. So it's very much on our mind to try to get this thing done as quickly as we can. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Dave.
Thank you. Most of you do know me. I was the energy coordinator for this city for 20 years, and I totally agree with Susan that the Downtown Development Authority played a very major role in a number of the projects that we achieved. She forgot about like LED lighting demonstration. First in the world.
First in the world. I take that back. When it was in its infancy. That's right.
On, and they continue to do it. I'm still retired, but I have worked with DDA as I don't know, their energy program director or some such title for a lot of years and implemented the electric car charging and public car charging in downtown Ann Arbor was all funded through the Downtown Development Authority. And I will say it's a very popular program. I drive an electric car and I can virtually never find a place to plug in. They're heavily used. People want us to build more, and we're relying on the Energy Commission to find a way that we can do that, that we don't have to fund, at least 100% of it. I was asked to come here tonight and talk about the original report that we produced. It works good now. On a solar carport feasibility analysis for the 4th and Williams structure, the 4th and Washington structure, and the Maynard structure. These were the structures identified by DDA as ones that they weren't planning on in the very near future modifying in some way. The Ann Ashley structure is now going to get some new floors on it, and the other reasons for why these 3 were chosen. And so I'm going to tell you about that report. Basically, this is interesting. There's no screens that I can see very well. This is pretty little. Basically, they asked me the following questions. What would it entail to install solar panels on the garages? And instructed me that it was not my job to worry about basically the structural engineering issues, the load capacities of the garages or how they might be connected into the roof deck for safety reasons. Assume that that can be worked out. Just do the solar potential part of that. Can it be designed so there wouldn't be any loss of parking spaces or any drive lane width on the structures? Can you do it without lowering the capacity of the parking structures? How much solar can it hold? What kind of limitations need to be considered? And what would it cost to install a complete system on the garages? Would batteries be needed or viable as part of the installation?
Excuse me, you can make that a full screen if you go to the menu.
I thought, yeah, really?
I
Is there a
figured that out
menu
earlier.
somewhere?
Yeah,
Go to
the
the,
menu.
or you can expand it, the big square in the upper right, Dave.
I would love to do that. Oh, yeah, we're getting there.
Yeah,
That was it?
hit the menu.
This is,
There's a menu, is it that lower right thing down up by the arrows above that little? No.
Nate?
This
You
thing.
know how to.
Just
That's
next to
just
that.
that
just to the right
advances
of
the
that
slide.
arrow. Yeah,
What,
straight
what?
down a little bit, there's like a paper looking thing,
Right.
In the middle. There you go.
Yeah,
Menu.
yeah.
full screen.
Ah,
Oh, thank you.
Look at this.
all right.
With it.
They've modernized the system since I was last here. And we used to just have a projector that showed on a screen that lowered down over there. Okay, so
Hit their heads.
what would it entail to install the collectors? Will we lose parking spaces? How much solar can it hold? Do we need batteries? How do you interface this with DTE? What kind of savings can you expect? Can the collectors be connected directly to electric car chargers down on the street level? And how about vertical wall mounting? Would that be a possible consideration? These were the questions that were brought forth basically through the DDA board to be answered in this feasibility analysis. I'm going to back up, I wish.
That's interesting.
Watch this. Ding. Oh, there's arrow keys. Okay. Down at the bottom block there, the study also examines installing a pilot solar carport at 4th and Catherine. That's basically across the street from the farmer's market, where we already have installed 3 electric car chargers. That's what Susan was referring to. The DDA board recently agreed to fund this pilot program, and we did spend today just going through the bids that we received from an RFP, and there'll be more information on that at a later date, but it is moving forward. So what's possible when you talk about putting solar on a carport? Here's some examples of everything from basically what the DDA engineers talked about, the $1 million solutions of just spanning the whole roof of the structure with very long steel beams and basically creating a new roof and then putting solar collectors on it, to a carport solution, basically individual, modular, if you will, carports that could be somehow affixed to the roof deck. I looked around for examples of solar carports. You don't find any that are on the roof decks of parking structures in Michigan at this time, but you can find a lot of them. There's Ford headquarters in Dearborn has 1.1 megawatts of carport solar. Down on the right, there's a little, that's a solar carport that Lansing Board of Water and Light built with some car chargers under it near their downtown market. Suburban Chevrolet out on Jackson Road in Ann Arbor has this solar carport that actually has some chargers under it. This is a really expensive solar carport. They spent about $270,000 building this carport. And then the bottom one, the big project in Michigan, 13 megawatts of solar carports going into parking lots on the MSU campus. 13 megawatts is more than all Ann Arbor has by a factor of, I don't know, a number. 5 maybe, 5 times as much solar as all of Ann Arbor. All right, cost of solar carports. How did I figure this out? Well, I knew, among other things, I am on the board of the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association. We have lots of installer members, and we're pretty aware of what prices are. Our members tell us that nowadays they're building rooftop solar at about anywhere from just about $2 to $2.70 a watt. The large-scale utility systems are going in under $2 a watt, and as low as I've heard $1.70 a watt for the cheapest ones. So I interviewed 3 Midwest area solar installers who have been building solar carports, including Innovadius that's doing the MSU system, and a couple in Michigan, and they all were extremely consistent in saying it's cost about $3 to $3.25 a watt because of the carport structure. You got to build a structure to put them on. That basically says there's a 30% premium over putting them on a roof versus building a carport and putting them on the carport.
And that doesn't include storage?
No.
No.
No, this is just putting the collectors on and connecting them to the grid. So federal government does provide 30% rebates, and there's some additional money for depreciation, but local governments don't pay taxes, so we're not eligible for that sort of rebate, but there are sometimes ways that you can take advantage of that anyways. To compute the solar energy potential of these parking spaces, I basically assumed that the carports, I walked the roofs of all the carports and figured out there really is very little obstruction on the roofs of these carports, and about 96% of the area of the carports are available without shading. And these things are going in at 10 degrees tilt. You really, I haven't seen anybody willing to build them at more tilt, and it has everything to do with how much wind they catch. They don't want to put them any more than that. They become sails, and the stress is just too much. Standard dimensions of the each parking space is known. I was able then to calculate how many PV modules would fit over each space, and you basically come up with a factor that you can get about 2 kilowatts of solar generation per parking space if what you're doing is just putting a carport roof over each parking space. So I took the 4% reduction in roof area, multiplied all the parking spaces, reduce that by 4%, multiply that by 2 kilowatts per space to come up with how much possible solar on each deck. This won't reduce the parking spaces, won't block the drive lanes, makes the solar just over the parking spaces themselves. I used PV watts to model that using Ann Arbor and 10-degree tilt, because some of the collectors, depending on the parking lot and the spaces, how they're oriented, some don't face south, they'll face east or west. You have to put a factor in for that. That all was considered. Looking at DTE and how much this energy is worth, I found there are 2 different rates at these parking lots. The smaller lots, which would be the 4th and Washington lot, is on a general service D3 rate. pay about 11.6 cents per kilowatt hour, and for every kilowatt that we displace with solar, we'll save 11.6 cents a kilowatt. That's not bad at all. For the other two, they're larger, and they're on what's now called a D11 rate. And it's a demand rate, which means that they are charging you more for a peak load over a 15-minute period sometime in the month than they are kilowatt hours. They do have a kilowatt hour charge, and it's all at 4.3 cents. And for every kilowatt we displace with a solar collector, we'll save 4.3 cents, but that doesn't add up over time into enough to actually pay for the solar. If you could find a way to reduce the demand charges on these lots, you could reduce that more, and we'll talk about that when we talk about battery storage. The good news in Michigan is, sort of, since it's not news yet, that the Michigan has been, Public Service Commission has been working on a new, it's what's called a PURPA rate. It's a federal mandate that the utility companies in the United States have to buy energy sources that are in their areas, and they're working on various values for various energies, and we're told in Lansing that price is right around 8 cents a kilowatt, and that's, as soon as they approve that, that's not too bad a price, and we could, for the two larger parking structures, utilize the PURPA rate and get 8 cents per kilowatt instead of the 4.3 cents a kilowatt. That helps, a lot in the payback. The deal with PURPA is that all that energy cannot be used on site. All that energy goes straight to the utility company. It's a straight, we generated that electricity for you, you give us that money back, it goes to buy down your electric bill, but it's a better deal than 4.33 cents. So, if we look at 4th and Washington, this is the smaller of the parking structures. It's only got 35 spaces up there on the roof. At 2 kilowatts of space minus 4% shading, you get 67.2 kilowatts. We've got the annual electric load at about 500,000 a year. This will displace about 16% of that. So at $3 a watt, which is possibly on the low end for carport solar on the roof, but as long as you are building any size, it should be pretty good. The system will cost $201,000, somewhere in that range. It'll generate $282,000 over its lifetime. My assumptions were 11 cents per kilowatt hour, a 3% electric cost inflation over time, $700 a year in maintenance, which are all pretty conservative. So that's a pretty good number. You would make more money from those collectors than you paid for them over the lifetime of the collectors. Now, I put in a third-party ownership. If you could do that deal where somebody can collect 30% tax rebate and the 20% depreciation, generally the way it works is they keep 10% of that, so that's 50% reduction total. They keep 10% because they want to make something in the deal, but you get 40% off. That would lower that price to $120,000, and it's going to generate $282,000 over its lifetime. Suddenly, when you can start working these third-party deals, this looks pretty darn good.
Were any of the other projects, if I may ask a question, were any of the other projects that you showed using like a third-party PPA with a third party?
The ones at DTE and Ford?
Well, yeah, for example.
They don't need to.
They're using it right there on site.
Yeah, well, they're eligible for the tax credits.
True.
The only time you
That's
need
true.
the third party is if you're a
for
nonprofit.
Yep,
I do way too much work with
Yeah.
nonprofits, churches, schools, and governments, and none of them can get the solar tax credits unless you do this third party kind of deal.
Is MSU third party, though?
MSU is not doing, they have their own power plant. It's
Yeah,
all
that's
run on an inside deal that's I don't know if they're getting tax credits out of that somehow or not, but it's all inside of the MSU government-run project.
So can I ask a question?
Yes.
So compared to the value of the parking spaces there, so does that roof space generate $282,000 of parking income?
Oh, easily.
Oh, easily. So
Yeah,
you can't. So there's no comparison there.
No, and we also haven't built the thing for this thing to sit on.
Okay.
So up in the air, one of the reasons to mention the earlier report is, 7, 8 stories in the air, the wind factor is a much greater factor. So now we're looking at real structural issues. How to anchor it into the garage so that this thing doesn't lift, even with a 10-degree tilt. That's part of the concern.
So I guess, what about just giving up the top floor of parking and putting solar right into the roof?
Well, your timing is good. There's a story in today's paper about some parking lots going away.
So that's just not an option, I guess, giving up that.
Well, I guess it's a question for the community. That garage, when it was built, it probably was $35,000 a car space to build it. And so the asset now is going to be generating funds for the city, the general fund, and
I'm just trying to
serving a
understand
neighborhood.
the logic behind it.
And we very, very seldom have spaces available in the system. The only spaces we have typically available, and we manage it that way, so we've got a pressure valve, is at 4th and William. We keep some spaces there just because at some point there are those big special events. You need to have some capacity downtown.
So this is actually increasing the asset of the value of this entire structure.
Yeah, and so we're adding some kind of structure upon which this sits. We have to figure that part out, which is why we were exploring earlier, like worst case scenario or even partial structures up on the garage top. And as many of you know, we'll be adding to the Ann and Ashley garage, and one of the elements that we've talked to the engineers about is what we could add to that scope and still stay within budget. So I'm not sure if the rooftop will at that point have the solar, but at minimum, the addition will have the bearing capacity to make that future discussion a little easier. So again, these are things that are very expensive. That doesn't mean you can't do it. You just take an incremental approach to it. And, again, back to why we're going to be learning, we'll talk about the lot at 4th and Catherine. We want to make a lot of mistakes while we're on the ground, so that when we're in the air, there'll be fewer of them. And, just sort of understand how it works. And the equipment for us is new. I know it's being used widely, but for us, it's new.
Okay. Thank you very much.
It's my experience that if you make something part of a project that's already going on, that you'll get a better price on it. So if you could look into including as much on the Ann project as you can, I think it would be more efficient, dollar-wise.
That's great. That's true.
Okay.
Okay.
Looking at the other ones, 4th and William's a little bit bigger. It's got 139 spaces on its roof. Again, the 2 kilowatts per space minus 4% for shading and obstruction. And when you look at the roof and you see little walls and elevator towers and things like that, they're hard to find, but you can find maybe about 4% worth of obstruction. So it can generate about 267 kilowatts. Which is about 64% of the annual load of that parking structure. The problem with this parking structure is it's a demand rate. It's a D11.
Right.
If we were to just simply generate it, we'd displace it at 4.3 cents a kilowatt hour. The payback would be completely non-existent. So what I did was I calculated it assuming the PERPA rate of 8 cents a kilowatt hour. Even in that case, what you see is it'll cost a little over $800,000 to install, and over 25 years generate $754,000. So, as soon as you drop the value of that electricity, you sometimes don't get the payback. Again, if we get a third-party ownership deal to put this on, we drop the $800,000 down to $480,000, and suddenly the economics change drastically.
So if I might ask one more question, do you really think that at 25 years, the system's no longer going to be effective? Because that's simply the 80, that's the guarantee on the panels, and most of us think that the panels will work for a good deal longer. So for instance, if you used 30 years, you might actually come up with a better number.
Well, that's absolutely true. And I did, in the report that I wrote, I did include a 30-year figure in the report, and it's impressive. I could go dig it out for you if you want, but it's more like 850,000 over 30 years, and we think it'll last 40 years. What we're finding all across the state of Michigan is the collectors aren't dying. They're going down a little 0.5% or less a year in output, but 40 years is not unreasonable to run the economics out.
So, David, I have another question. So, selling the power at a higher for electric vehicle charging, you could sell the power for more than 4.3 cents, the demand charge rate, the rate that you're doing. You can't do this.
We
No.
can't sell
You
power.
can't sell-
We're not a utility company. There's a number of things we do to carefully avoid saying we're selling electricity.
So electric vehicle charging, you can't charge somebody for,
You can charge them for not the electricity, you can charge them for the time they're there charging. You
okay.
just can't have a meter on
Right,
them
okay,
measuring the
okay.
kilowatt hours and then
Right.
base what they pay you on the kilowatt hours that they're using.
so,
So there are ways around that.
so if you sold some of this power, you could change this economics too, I guess. If you charge people for time on
Yes.
meters
For
somewhere.
some of it, but
The-
you know, I
it'd
don't
be
know
more-
what percentage of load would be electric car charging. It's probably pretty low on a large structure, no matter how many we put in.
Okay.
All right, the last one, the big one is the Maynard parking structure. That has 185 spots on the roof. I had to do a reduction, I give the 4% for obstruction. I also did another 4% because some of these collectors have to face east-west. And, you know, I'm trying to be realistic here on what you could expect out of it. Basically, 64% of the load of that parking structure could be handled by solar energy. Cost about a little over $1 million to install these things, and it would generate almost that much over the lifetime. Again, that's using the PURPA rate. And again, if you can get a third-party deal and get 40% off of that, suddenly it costs $614,000 to build and generates over $1 million in its first 25 years. Doesn't look quite so bad. We got really nice responses on our RFP that were due last Thursday, and one company stated it really well. They said, you know, we understand that DDA feels that property in downtown Ann Arbor is at a premium and places to put solar collectors is limited. And so to put them in this free space above the roof deck is a way of getting solar into downtown that otherwise couldn't be done. And so you know, I thought that was very well put, that it is certainly a goal of Ann Arbor to see how much solar we can get into this area, and this is one way to do it. Quickly looking at wall mounting. I was asked to look at what can we do with the walls, and you can see here pictures of the three structures, and obviously there are spaces along the vertical walls of these that you could put solar, and so I measured that and computed it. Basically, of course, the problem with vertical collectors are that they don't perform as well as even ones at 10% that are facing south. You get somewhere between a 36 to 49% loss in total performance. I computed what you could do mounting it on the south and the east and the west sides of these things, and came up with the values that are listed on this chart. There was no way that the vertical mounted solar collectors would pay for themselves over the lifetime. I did lower the cost of installing it to $2.50 a watt because you don't have to build the carports now. So not $3, but $2.50. But you still have to put very well anchored solar collectors on the side of these things, because Susan tells me she doesn't want solar collectors falling on people.
Or blowing up.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if I understood correctly, when you say mount them vertically, if this is sort of the sidewall, they would be mounted like this? Or
Yes. And
did you
that-
look at the option of mounting them like this? Like, I think the
Like
city,
awnings or-
Like awning.
like an awning.
It
City
is,
Hall, I
but
think
you'd
it
have to
exceeds.
anchor them a lot better.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
Yeah, so
again,
that cost would go up,
This
but
gets
you,
a lot less wind than this.
oh, for sure.
You know, the
Yeah.
ability
I think
to,
City
I was
Hall
asked
exceeds
about
that way, right?
vertical. Yes, I think you could get a little bit better performance if you created them more like awnings, but then you
Yeah.
get the drip and the snow dry, you get a lot of other issues.
That's true. The
that
snowfall and
happen.
stuff would be.
So, yeah,
Right.
I think we wanted to look at that. You know, it's possible, and maybe at some point desirable, but it doesn't pay as fast as the other methods.
Was it covering the entire wall or just the open?
No,
pay
just
portion?
still wanted to get the daylight in.
Yeah.
So what I did was certainly not just block off the whole wall. No, you look at these various structures, you can see along the concrete walls and whatever, these are the areas that would hold solar collectors, and you'd still have the same amount of daylight almost coming in.
We have building code issues that have to allow free flow of air.
It's true.
So that, we didn't explore that.
All right, would batteries make sense? We did look at batteries, especially to try to reduce what's called the demand profile of the big structures. And the way that you can reduce demand, you need to understand that in our electric bill in any given month for, let's say, the Maynard structure, what they do is they look at every 15-minute period for the whole month for the highest amount of electricity you used in that 15-minute period, be it a Wednesday afternoon or a Sunday morning or whatever it'll be, and that sets your demand level for that month, and then they bill you like $14 a kilowatt or watt for that. That's the big deal, and that's the number you want to reduce. And what happens with solar is that, let's say it's that was August 13th was the big day where your demand was determined at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and you've got solar on there now, and so it's staying below that demand, so you're not going to hit it, and then a cloud comes by. And it's a big enough cloud that it blocks the sun for 15 minutes, and suddenly you're right at the same demand you would have had whether you had the solar or not. And so the problem with solar is you can't guarantee that the solar will be working constantly through every 15-minute period, through every day of the month to do that. So then you say, well, all right, but we could have batteries. And the problem with the if parking structure were the kind of thing that at some moment some big motor came on or 14 elevators all ran at exactly the same time and created the peak, then you could have batteries. You could measure what that is, and batteries could carry for 2 minutes that motor started up or whatever and avoid that peak. A parking structure has a very level load, and to put enough batteries in to shave the peak turned out to be, it's covered in the report, but it's a formidable amount of batteries and a formidable cost. Just doesn't really financially work out. You work way better on buildings that have sudden spikes, and batteries can handle those. It just doesn't really work on a parking structure.
What is the major energy use of a parking structure?
Lighting.
Lighting.
We
So,
have,
but,
yeah, we have elevators, the EV units, and so
Yeah.
they're all contributing. Offices are in there as well.
yeah. So it varies over the day in terms of timing of
A little
demand,
bit.
but not, you're saying not over the
Yeah,
month?
there just aren't the big peaks that come certainly in manufacturing plants and even office buildings with air conditioning loads that you can kind of predict, and they ramp
Spike,
up
yeah.
towards the end of the afternoon. Parking structures just aren't like that.
But the lighting's not on during the day, is it? Or
Lighting's on,
all the time?
80 to 90% of the lighting's on 24
All
hours.
the
They're,
time.
they're on light sensors, so on the rooftop, you might not see them, but internal to the garage, it's dark enough that they're on all the time.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so it's a great place to put LED lighting, because the payback is really quick,
Right.
because they're always on. But it's not, you know, as far as solar trying to carry all that load and batteries make up the difference, doesn't really work. We already answered the question, yes, you can design it without lots of parking place or drive lane width. Connecting directly to car chargers at street level. Again, it's just a matter of you don't do it that, if you tried to do it that way, and I plugged my car in down below, I would have to look up and make sure the sun was shining, or I wouldn't be getting a car charge. And my car would get kind of upset every time a cloud went by. It would rather see a level delivery of electricity. So in every case that you see an electric car, like the Lansing one, for instance, where you see electric car chargers under a solar canopy, it's not directly feeding those chargers, it's feeding the grid, which nearby, and arguably a pretty decent percentage of the electrons produced by the solar will go into the car if the sun is shining while the car is there parked. But the whole idea is that you are generating enough electricity with those solar collectors to cover the electricity that the car chargers are using. So it's a zero-sum deal, and people get to feel like they're driving a zero-pollution vehicle, which is pretty cool.
Well, they are. It's not just feeling, David. Come on.
Well, as long as they're charging it with the sun, it is
Or charging your car with
absolutely
fracked
zero-pollution
gas or
transportation.
coal.
There was a summary table, and it looked a lot like this, looking at Maynard and 4th and William and 4th and Washington covering, and this is where you do see the solar value over 30 years versus 25. And so again, you can expect it to last 30 years. There is some great economic gain in that 30th year, and you know, remember things like I use 3% electric cost inflation. That's on the low end. But 25 years from now, that puts electricity at fairly, so I don't know, fairly expensive. So the savings get to be really significant the more you go out. Finally, this is where we're talking about where we're not talking, we quit talking. We are doing a solar car charging demonstration project. The meeting today was really fun because we really don't know the answers to a lot of this. You know, there are concerns about, you know, what if a big bunch of snow slides off and hits somebody who isn't looking? You know, how do we protect from that? You know, a number of questions that we want to answer. We got 3 good bids. We are going to do a little more learning before we award that bid, but I think the process this is just a perfect way to move forward with this. Learn on the ground on a small scale. We are also have an opportunity that we didn't expect to get of looking at some third-party financing options and whatever that on a project this small, it wouldn't normally even be offered. Some of these companies are very large and they know that it could lead to bigger projects, and so they're willing to do a lease program or a third-party financing with tax capture, which will be good for all of us to learn how we do that as a government entity if we want to do solar. And that's pretty much where we're at. We're not standing still.
Yeah, no, that's true. So in addition to Dave's study, I've shared with Nate, and I can send another copy, the Carl Walker report, which was the structural piece of this, and the two kind of fit together, just so you get a sense of how the total costs might work. Happy to share that, and as this starts to take shape, you know, Nate's a team member, so I'm sure you'll be getting updates as this thing starts coming together. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions from the commission?
Just kudos to the DDA and
Yes.
to Dave for all your work. And Dave, I assume you'll share this through GLREA with other municipalities,
Well,
hopefully?
Yeah, I actually have a lot of hats, and one of them is working with the state energy office on a community energy management program where we work with local governments all over the state of Michigan, and they're back to watching Ann Arbor.
Yeah.
I do have a question, actually. Because the DDA, my understanding, is a public-private partnership, right?
No, we're quasi-governmental.
Okay.
So, no, it's a fair question.
I thought that was like the phrase
DDAs
that
are
was tossed
enabled by
around a
state
lot.
statute.
Okay.
And so we're affiliated with the city of Ann Arbor, much like the AATA, when you
Yeah.
think of the transit authority. It's in the form of, it's a quasi-governmental entity. The board's appointed by the mayor and council, the budget's approved as part of the city budget process, but the DDA itself has its own set of enabling powers, as it were.
Right.
For those that are interested, I brought along hard copies, and if I could, I'll just leave them with you.
Yeah.
And, please let us know if you need anything.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Excellent.
Wonderful
Outstanding.
report, great project. Keep up the good work.
You bet. Huh.
Next on the agenda, dark skies and lighting. Sally?
You got that down.
Yep. Okay, well, thank you so much for this opportunity to address an issue that is important and of growing concern right here in Ann Arbor. And I am representing a coalition of stakeholders, including astronomers from the University of Michigan. We also have with us Norbert Vance, astronomer from EMU, and as well the local amateur astronomy organizations and bird advocacy groups. I myself am a professor of astronomy at the University of Michigan, and currently am also on the Board of Trustees of the American Astronomical Society. And the AAS has issued a resolution on light pollution this year as well. So the problem is essentially that we've gone from a natural dark sky environment over a course of about 150 years to something that looks more like this for the vast majority of people. And a lot of this lighting right here is important, necessary, and even beautiful, but a lot of it is not. And the part that is not corresponds to light pollution, which is wasted light that performs no function or task. It is not of use to anybody. And because light is energy, it is literally wasted energy. So you can see from space here that all of this light going straight up into the sky is not serving anybody, and it's literally light pollution. It's literally wasted energy. So the International Dark Sky Association estimates that about 13% of residential electricity use, it goes to outdoor lighting. Not all of that, of course, is light pollution, but a significant quantity is. They also estimate that the light pollution contributes something like the equivalent in carbon dioxide emissions of 3 million cars, corresponding to $3 billion annually. So this is a significant concern.
These are figures just for the United States.
Yes. And the problem is increasing exponentially, in some cases a rate of up to 20% a year, depending on location. Right here is the light pollution map for Michigan, and you can see that Ann Arbor has its own distinctive footprint right here. And this also demonstrates that the affected area is 10 to 100 times larger than the source light polluting city that, for example, Ann Arbor's footprint is much larger than the city of Ann Arbor itself. So the surrounding regions are also stakeholders in this issue. This is called artificial light at night by biologists. ALAN, it's known to have a negative impact on biology. It disrupts the ecosystem. And in particular, also for humans, it's known to disrupt melatonin production, which is what happens when we sleep at night. And so we just saw this year the Nobel Prize in Medicine was awarded for discoveries related to the circadian rhythms, a growing realization of the importance of this. Birds are especially sensitive to ALAN. Birds migrate largely at night, and building collisions are the #1 cause of bird death. It's estimated that up to 1 billion birds are killed annually, and largely because they become very confused by artificial light at night. They rely on natural sources to navigate, and artificial sources make them very confused. So there are organizations, even in our own area, that are working to try to mitigate this, and you can see the results in IPSI here from one day. Also of great concern are nocturnal pollinators, and these include moths, insects, bats, pollinators of species and crops that could be economically important, and so it is an issue of substantial concern. For humans, the American Medical Association has put out a very strong statement about light pollution and a report about LED lighting. Because of the melatonin link, they have been concerned about cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and obesity. They've also pointed out that disability glare is an issue. Glare is, for example, when you have car headlights coming into your face at night so that you can't see, and that puts you in physical danger. And they also point out that blue light is much more damaging than red light. Astronomers are deeply concerned about losing our connection to the universe. The night sky is the only astronomical lab of its kind, and it's, for countless generations, allowed many students to become interested in science, to learn more about our place in the universe. In northern Michigan, we still have the opportunity to have pristine skies where you can see this spectacular view of the Milky Way and the northern lights. Both of these are completely obliterated by light pollution. And so we are very concerned about the science education aspect of this as well as our fundamental work, of course. So there's 3 different types of light pollution. I mentioned glare already. The second one is light trespass, light going where it's not wanted. Classic example is neighbor's floodlight shining into your bedroom window at night. And then you've got sky glow, which prevents us from seeing the night sky. So being a daytime species, we have a natural fear of the dark, and we tend to over-illuminate. And in fact, too much light can sometimes actually reduce your visibility and therefore reduce your safety. Here are a couple examples where you can see a strong glare, which if it were properly shielded would actually enhance the visibility in this scene. Below here is another example. If you were just to shield that light properly, you would actually be able to see much more clearly. So too much light, unshielded light, and glare can actually inhibit your safety. Here's another example where we can see a very well-lit scenario with too much light causing very strong contrasts and shadows. So you can see a person standing there, and now the person is still in this image, but much more difficult to see. Here's the person now, and here's the person in the second image. And the person has actually moved to the shadows underneath this light right here. And so we've illuminated the tops of the trees, which is not helping anybody and confusing birds, and we've actually created a scenario where the lighting is not really enhancing the safety as much as we would hope. Here's another example where we have a bank with an ATM. Does this mean that the environment is very visible and safe? Or on the other hand, that maybe you are vulnerable and exposed using this ATM where anybody can kind of see what you're doing, watching you from the shadows? Recall that your dark adaptation of your eyes are going to be compromised, and it will take 15 to 20 minutes for those proteins to start growing back into your retinas and allow you to see better at night. So basically, more light does not necessarily mean that you are in a safer environment. So we've mentioned that blue light is worse than red light, and there are different kinds of white. These LED lights are very, very heavy on the blue kind of light relative to what we normally might see in daylight, which is warm white here. And the industry uses color temperature as a means to define the color, and that's basically refers to the correlation for a thermal spectrum where the higher the temperature goes, the bluer the light looks. So this is a high temperature blue spectrum, and this is a red color lower temperature. And so the International Dark Sky Association recommends a lower temperature of around 3,000 degrees for whites. And they're actually moving toward a consensus that's in fact even lower than that. The thing is that blue light scatters far, far more strongly than red light, and so that means it causes more glare. Glare is scattered light in your eyeball, and it also destroys your night vision more than red light. And then basically, because of all that scattering, blue light causes much, much more light pollution as well, because it just scatters in the atmosphere and comes back down. Now, one caveat is that the color temperature can be quite misleading. So here I'm showing you a spectra, so you've got blue at this end and red at this end, of two different sources. One is the moon, which is a normal thermal spectrum, and the other is an LED with the same color temperature. Both have a color temperature of 4,000 degrees, and yet one of them has a very strong blue component in here. That's this LED spectrum, and that's because an LED is not a thermal spectrum. So that's just an important caveat to keep in mind, because it will still have all of the problems that blue light has. So the good news is that solutions are very easy. Once we change the lights, the problem is gone, so we simply have to want to change the lights. All we need to do is light only what is needed, no more than what is needed, and only when is needed. We simply need smart lighting, not more lighting. An important thing to keep in mind is that brightness is an exponential phenomenon. So, for example, if we go from twilight to deep twilight, we need to reduce our lighting by a factor of 90%. If we want to go from twilight to full moon, we want to reduce by 99%, and so forth. So it's not enough to say, oh, our LED streetlights reduce 85% of our uplight, because you've only gone down one notch. You haven't even gone down one notch. If you want to go from twilight to starlight, you'd need to reduce by 99.99%. And therefore, full cutoff shielding is absolutely essential. And by that we mean zero uplight, no light going above the horizontal. In fact, light that's going slightly above the horizontal is about the worst. Light going upward at an oblique angle will go through a thicker layer of air, and all those molecules will just scatter your light right back down, creating light pollution. And these oblique angles spread the footprint of the light as well. So these oblique angles are really bad. Having full cutoff shielding is absolutely essential. That's exactly what we want there. And what else do we want? We would like to enhance visibility, not impede it. We would like to contribute to the nightscape, not dominate it. And ideally, we would like to have a master plan. And that is evident in this very nice plaza that you see right here at Texas A&M University, which shows good design. So you can see that the illumination is very clear, there's good visibility. You don't see glare from these lights at all. You don't even see the lights that are illuminating the plaza. They must be at the tops of these posts right here, but they have full cutoff shielding, so you don't see them. There's no light trespass. The perimeter is still dark. The fountain's a very nice contribution. The stairway is illuminated by down lighting, so all very nicely designed. Here in Ann Arbor, we've got these tennis courts. Outdoor lighting should also provide safety and facilitate the use of outdoor spaces. Again, very nice illumination here. These lights may be a little too bright. They're definitely a bit too blue, but the illumination is good. You can see that this is illuminated by full cutoff shielding. Once again, you do not see the lights that are illuminating the courts. Instead, you see these light-polluting globes here that are kind of cluttering up the perimeter. The lights that are actually illuminating are right there, so you can't even see them otherwise. Here's some more examples. So we can see some full cutoff shielding here, angled to prevent glare. And on the other hand, here we have some lights that are pointing right up at the sky at an angle, the worst possible kind, though I really like that restaurant. And this is an issue, actually, that people in Michigan do care about. When Ford Field changed their roof lighting so that there's this huge purple glow in the sky, 1,200 people signed a petition to complain about that. And then here we have front page of the Free Press, a beautiful article about dark skies and light pollution, which I highly recommend. And we are also, here in southeastern Michigan, the home of one of the largest amateur astronomy communities in the US. There are 22 amateur clubs in southeast Michigan, so many that there's an umbrella organization called Great Lakes Association of Astronomy Clubs. And they put on this wonderful public event called Astronomy at the Beach, which is a great thing for families, people of all ages, every year at Kensington Metro Park. And they allow people to come and look through telescopes and do astronomy-related activities. It's a really fun thing, and all put on by volunteers. Michigan is also home to the Headlands International Dark Sky Park, which is the 6th ever dark sky park designated by the International Dark Sky Association. It's up near Mackinac, a county park whose dark sky designation was initiated by local people. Astronomers had absolutely nothing to do with it. They simply felt like dark skies were an important asset and that they wanted to do this. They were awarded the State of Michigan Pure Award earlier this year, so that the state actually recognizes dark skies as an important tourist commodity. They have also won the Best Dark Sky Place of 2017 from the IDA at their annual convention just this last weekend. And even more interesting is that the state of Michigan, the legislature, has designated 6 state parks as dark sky preserves. This has nothing to do with the IDA. They had no idea these parks even existed. So at the recommendation of the Department of Natural Resources, the state legislature specified that these would be dark sky preserves. So the state itself recognizes that dark skies are an important natural resource. Locally, we have some lighting regulations already in place. Detroit has a clause in their city code about lighting. Scioto and Brighton Townships have lighting ordinances. And I mentioned the dark sky preserves. Ann Arbor also, before the governor's proclamation, had already passed a resolution to support the Safe Passage Great Lakes Days, which turn off the lights, recommend to turn off the lights during the bird migration season. And so it's a real privilege to be living in a community like this, where we are so conscious of sustainability and environmental causes. And so we feel that light pollution control is fully consistent with these kinds of initiatives. And it's especially a point of pride for Ann Arbor to be pioneering the LED conversion project that we heard about earlier. We were the first in the country to start looking into these energy-saving devices. But one glaring omission, if I may use the word, is that the light pollution from these LED light sources was not really taken into account. And so when we look down, again, having talked about parking structures today, we can see that there's actually a lot of light pollution coming directly up from these globes simply because of their design. And there are other building projects going up all the time, many of which are not especially friendly on the light pollution front. Another concern is, will we actually save energy in the long run? Economists have pointed out since 1865 this Jevons paradox, which specifies that as energy efficiency increases, energy consumption increases as well. So here's the cost of lighting going down exponentially for the last 300 years, and here is the exponential increase of energy consumption that absolutely counteracts that. So if we were going to save energy in the long run, we would really need to have regulation to ensure that that happens. This is not a new issue for Ann Arbor. There have been multiple dark skies initiatives over at least the last 15 years or so. And in fact, the LED project summary makes allusion to a dark sky initiative in 2011. So it was rather surprising and disappointing to see then that the Climate Action Plan, when it was issued the following year, made no mention at all about this issue, about light pollution or, dark skies. And so fast forward now to June, July of this year, and our group was basically galvanized by the resolution by the City Council to proceed with the replacement of the LED globe lights to have more of the same light polluting design. Right. 1 week after we submitted our letter to the City Council, they then passed this revision to the zoning code, which specifies that new buildings downtown will have a minimum 60% of street level facade that will be windows or glazing, which is again not very helpful for light pollution. You can see that windows and glazing will reflect perfectly useful downlight into light pollution upward. All of these interior areas will now also be open to light pollution, and then all these reflections are of course very confusing to wildlife as well. So what we feel would be very helpful would be to have inclusion of light pollution control specifically called out in the Climate Action Plan, and to have a city ordinance to control light pollution. If we really wanted to go about this right, it would also be helpful for the city to do a lighting audit to really look at what kinds of lights are superfluous or redundancies and so forth, and to develop a plan. We also understand that the administrator has already agreed to modify the globe light specifications in the $1 million project to specify a maximum color temperature and a maximum lumen output, which we are very grateful for. And I think this is an important step forward. And of course, we would really welcome a resolution from the Energy Commission to help move forward some of these initiatives. So basically, we hope that there would be some plan to light only what is needed, no more than needed, and only when needed. This will save energy, restore the natural environment, improve health and safety, and allow people to reconnect with the night sky. And this is consistent with the values that we hold here in Ann Arbor and in the state of Michigan. Thank you very much.
Questions from commissioners?
Question. Do you have a draft ordinance yourself?
We have submitted a draft ordinance. Yes, it's basically a draft that was put together by the International Dark Sky Association together with the Illuminating Engineering Society. And so we did give that draft to Matt Nod. There are also, we have copies of other ordinances. We have the Brighton and Scio ordinances. And let's see, there was at least one other, well, Tucson, Arizona.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
We have their ordinance as well. So we could certainly provide all
Well,
those.
could you provide those to Nate as well?
Yep, certainly.
Thank you.
Other questions? John?
Just a couple of questions. Have you had any kind of audience within the University of Michigan? I'm just curious.
We're trying to line that up now. We had to start somewhere, and
Yeah, good.
the article in MLive was what got us started.
Great, great. And then I'm wondering about education of current architects, urban planners, landscape architects, both ones that are already practicing, but also ones that are being educated. Have you thought about that? And then also like maybe, I don't know if something like this could be incorporated in LEED. It seems to me it would make sense that LEED could
be there.
do
I'm
that.
sure.
Have you talked about that, LEED
We've-
certification, and whether or not there could be some mention of this too? So
I think there already is.
is there already?
Yeah.
Okay.
It comes down to, you get a point if you don't have light going off of your site.
Mhm. Okay.
Right, yeah, I mean, we have, within our group, talked a little bit about talking with lighting design people, architects and so forth. We have not moved forward on that yet. But you raise a very important point, which is that what we really want is to have a lot of public education essentially around this issue, because nobody wants to pollute, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is an issue where it's happening inadvertently, and if we have a lot more consciousness raising around this, that we can make a lot of progress on it. So I think that is one of the most important things that we hope to accomplish at some point.
All right. I mean, even fixture manufacturers, you know.
Well,
getting through to
fixture
them.
manufacturers are already on board, so to speak, because all you have to do is, Google dark sky light fixture or whatever, and you will get all kinds of options to buy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So it is really a public awareness and then
Yes.
awareness within the community that's speccing and designing or selecting these.
yes, I believe so.
Yep, okay, great. I'm
So-
gonna go home and change my lights.
Has Real Seafood done anything? They must be aware of this presentation.
No, they're not aware of this presentation.
You should send them that slide.
I'm sorry, I picked on them, we just had
No, it's a
to
great idea.
have some
Yeah.
examples from around town.
That seemed like such a solvable one. They could just simply move the lights on top, you know?
Yep, exactly, yeah. It's
Point 'em
not a
down.
difficult problem to solve. In the grand scheme of things, it's not an expensive problem to solve. And once the problem is solved, like I said, it's solved. It's not like toxic waste where, you still have residual issues. So it's simply a matter of changing the lights.
Yeah, they probably reduce their power consumption too at the same
They
time.
probably would.
You do, in fact, yes, you save energy that way. I mean, when I changed the light fixtures on our garage, we noticed, I put the same light bulb in there and it's brighter, so. Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing thing where you can actually save money and save energy by solving this problem.
Other questions or comments from the commissioners? Well, there was a move to have an ordinance such as this several years ago, and somehow it got dropped or tabled or ended up on somebody's desk and never revived. But we will make an effort to try and get it through this time. It's always been a little bit annoying to me that Scioto Township doesn't allow wall packs and Ann Arbor does, which they're a disgrace to architecture and the environment, but we allow them, so.
Well, thank you very much. That would be greatly appreciated. And
Keep up the
anything
good
that we can do to help, we would be more than delighted. We have
Right.
a coalition of people now, and there are people available with different kinds of expertise.
I expect that we'll probably have to work together with both the Environmental Commission and the Planning Commission to come up with an ordinance, but I think it's something that we should work on.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was a very
Thanks.
illuminating presentation.
Thank you.
Sorry.
That's good. Better you than me, yeah.
Next on the agenda, Green Fleet's policy update.
Yeah, just briefly, we're looking to get the policy update through in December, and at this point, Commissioner Mirsky's been active and has given me some feedback. We've worked through a draft update to this, consistent with the resolution, emphasizing electrification, solar potential where possible, and setting the mission consistent with the CAP goals. So those are the primary changes that are expressed, and making some refinements. So I kind of wanted to see, it's not my view that we need a supplemental resolution at this point from the commission, but I just kind of wanted to put it out there if any others on the board would like to see or comment on the draft, to either let me know here or afterwards, because right now, we're trying to get it to the administrator.
Could you send out the
Pronto.
latest update?
Yeah, I can
send
do
it
that,
around
and if
to
anybody,
everybody.
Yeah.
we'll probably have, the dates are to
Could you
respond.
summarize the basic changes? I mean,
So again, the mission initially was a fuel reduction goal, that had a date certain for that, the initial policy to reduce 10%. The new mission is to reduce CO2, so CO2 is the metric, and consistent with the timelines in that. One of John's comments was that it stated the 2025 timeframe, and we have a 2050 timeframe as well, so that would be the intent there. So shifting consumption to CO2, and I think where in as many places as possible, emphasizing especially light-duty options that exist to focus on electric vehicles. So that really mostly encapsulates it. There's greater, detail. The policy is actually quite a bit of breadth to it in terms of structural things, but it's in some ways minutia. John's made some points about telematics and things like that we want to continue to build into, and we do have that going now in the fleet. Just needs to be articulated a little bit more in the plan update as well. So
Is this just city fleets?
it's just city. It's only applies to the city's fleet. And it's interesting. It's almost a 50-50 split, light duty, heavy duty. So salt trucks, garbage, and the like, versus small pool vehicles, police, and those sorts of things. So
Is that 50-50 by number of vehicles?
by number of
or
vehicles, yeah.
Not
consumption.
consumption. Consumption must be much higher on the heavy vehicle side.
CO2
A much larger
Oh,
percentage of
50,
consumption
Oh, consumption,
occurs
as you
with the
said,
heavy.
consumption.
Yeah.
Gives the
Not
church for a minute there.
conception, no,
All right.
not birthing.
Yeah, no, the literal count of vehicles, the
Yeah.
quantity, it's about 51% light duty, 49% heavy duty vehicles. But yeah, the proportional emissions would
And
tilt that way.
the tricky part is that increasing a heavy vehicle's efficiency by a small percentage is probably better than converting a car over to electricity because of the amount of energy
Yeah,
that they
and-
actually use.
And
Well,
the,
the routes are probably also longer too, I would guess.
Yeah,
right,
At
so
least
it's
in
more
many cases.
problematic, but
and you
we
have.
need to do what we can.
Right, and one of the crux questions with the heavy duty is the fact that in general, it's typically conveyed as a option is natural gas. A lot of
Mhm.
fleets have
Right.
moved over to CNG before you get, since we don't really have too many electric garbage trucks out there. I hear China's got $1 million one, or I'm sorry, Chicago has $1 million one from China. But
We'll see if Elon demonstrates.
Yeah, we'll see if
Yeah,
Elon
With a
pulls
new
this up.
sexy salt truck or garbage truck.
Right.
Probably leave rubber with it.
But the diesel engines in general have cleaned up rather dramatically in the last 10 years alone. So it's sort of, do you wait for the electrics to come, or is there enough room for CNG?
I want garbage drones.
They've worked on hydraulic hybrids, but.
Well, and there's
So I'll
electric
send
school
I'll
buses
send the
now,
update
I
around to
feel
everyone.
like
of those
you
who
give it a
comment.
few
Thank
years
you.
and.
Cool.
Committee updates. Anything that any committee wants to relate?
Maybe just very briefly, the Community Solar Subcommittee met last Wednesday, I think it was. And we had report outs from various subgroups, one looking at sort of existing canned alternatives or offerings from DTE, My Green Power, and Arcadia Power. That's probably the alternative or the option that is something that could be done relatively short term. It's not really particularly attractive. The Arcadia Power offering is a increase of 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour to go to 100% renewable. And the other options that were reported on, there's some good progress being made, but it's still very preliminary. There's a group working on putting community solar on schools in general, starting with public schools. There's some discussions going on with the school board and its efforts at trying to support the Paris Climate Accord. There's potential targeting of the STEAM school, which is the former Northside Elementary. So there's some things going on there. And then there's also a look at doing something in the nonprofit area. And there's some contacts that are going to be pursued most likely in the new year. So at one time, we had targeted having some kind of maybe report out done by the end of the year for a report to the Energy Commission in early 2018. I think it's unlikely that we'll have much to be able to report out other than potentially something where we at least summarize what the DTE and the Arcadia Power options are. But in terms of anything that's truly local, those are going to be longer-term activities and efforts. Many of you were there, and you want to add to that?
No, I think you covered it pretty well.
Yeah. Our next meeting is going to be in January, early January.
There are some things that are still out there that will make a difference as to what makes sense, like what the PURPA rules come out as, and a few other things.
Yep.
Potential tariffs by the federal government, and local solar taxation, which by sometime, probably in January, we'll know most of those, and
Yes.
that'll help us to know how to proceed a little better. Anything else?
Let me just say a word
Sure.
about the Solar Faithful project.
Yeah.
Probably not.
Actually, that was also reported on too in the community solar, but go ahead. Yeah.
So the Solar Faithful project is, I'm working on with Josh and Nate on that committee, and what it's trying to do is find 10 congregations in the community that are interested in putting solar on their facilities, some of which may do a community solar option. There's third-party funding options being looked at, and several others just raising money internally, et cetera. So of the 10, 2 have already moved and pulled the trigger on projects. One is actively raising funds now, the Zen Temple, and the other one is will probably launch in the new year. So the projects are actually moving, and they'll have potential to be structured as a community solar, or at least a component of those projects may be structured as a community solar option. Clearly, they're asking people to put it in monies. Right now, it's a tax-deductible charitable contribution model mostly. We'll see if they reach their goals. If they don't, then they'll probably have to move to another option, which is some variation of a community solar. So those things are going in parallel. I guess for another thing, anyone who's interested, my tax tribunal date is the 29th of this month, and we'll be taking the tax tribunal. Most of you know, or those who may not know, Wayne started us down this track saying somebody needs to volunteer to take a case through the tax tribunal, and so I took that task on, bought a solar system, and am now going through the process. We'll see. Our case, or my case, simply says the city, that solar is personal property, and therefore it shouldn't be taxed. And that's the case we're taking to the tax tribunal, and we'll see what happens. And it'll be here in Ann Arbor. They're going to meet at the county building in Ypsilanti on the 29th, and that's when the hearing will be done.
When, do you know the timeline around when they would then issue a decision?
They won't make the decision while I'm there, I know that. So,
Right.
So that it's small claims court, because of the value of the solar system is less than $80,000. So it's relegated to the small claims court. We have the city has 15 minutes, I have 15 minutes to present our case. Essentially, those cases have already been made in writing, so it's an opportunity to meet and simply restate it one more time, and they will then take that under advisement and make a decision. So there's precedence on both sides, so we'll see what the tax tribunal does.
Good luck.
Yes,
Good luck, yes, thank you. Many of you also know that there's a bill making its way through the committee process at the state to get rid of this tax. And once again, the Michigan Municipal League is still fighting against the elimination of solar taxation. Michigan Municipal League, which Ann Arbor pays dues to, still says that solar should be taxed, and they're actively using the dues that we pay in Ann Arbor to send their lobbyists to Lansing to lobby to make sure that solar is taxed in Michigan. And it's unfortunate that a portion of Ann Arbor's Michigan Municipal League dues are spent against the interests of the solar community and Ann Arbor's climate action plan. Even at this moment, that is continuing. So.
My understanding was they were neutral on the bill. I mean, I know it's undergoing changes, but
They've been actively against it in the past, and their neutrality now is construed as they're not stepping forward to say we should eliminate this tax. They've had the opportunity numerous times to state that case. And their Green Communities program, which they take a tremendous amount of credit for and has received state funding from the Michigan Energy Office to run the Green Communities program, it also promotes solar taxation in green communities, which seems odd, but here we are. So I'll let you know, 29th, probably.
Good luck with that.
We'll see what happens.
Public input. We still have some public here.
Before we do that, I have one
Oh,
question.
sure.
Or maybe, I think that's the last option. Who will be our new council person on the Energy Commission, or if it's not known yet, when will that be determined?
Not known yet, but it should be soon, I'm guessing, a matter of a couple weeks here, or certainly by the end of the year. I'm not positive if it'll be the December meeting, or I think often it's, I'd have to look back if Jason or Chip came in January or just
Yeah.
what, but I have no word yet.
Okay, great, thanks.
And then we'll find out whether one or both positions are actually filled.
Yes.
What, both positions?
Well, the bylaws say that we have two
really?
council people, but
Oh,
there's only been one filled in recent history. I think back in the early 90s or maybe late 80s, there might have been two, although one never showed up.
I didn't know that.
But that's my memory anyways, but, yeah, so, other commissions have to, planning commission has to, environmental commission has to. Correct. So, we're the Rodney Dangerfield of commissions, I guess. On to public input.
I'm Norbert Vance from Eastern Michigan University. I wanted to follow protocol here and not interrupt her presentation, but she spoke well of light pollution. I've been doing the presentation that she mentioned at the Kensington Metro Park event for the past 20 years for a half-hour presentation. I seem to be saddled with this because it is an environmental issue, and public interest is starting to pick up. So we're doing our part in education, and I speak of this in my classes over at Eastern Michigan in terms of light pollution. I spent an entire period on the subject. It's that important to us. I even play good light, bad light, and bring the kids up and have them crank a hand generator to show just how much power it takes to power a city. So we're doing our best to get the word out and for the cause. Living in Dexter, where I do, I have seen in just the past 2 years the infusion of more gray light. You used to see orange light domes over cities, but this intrusion of gray light from the LED lighting has become very significant in a very short period of time. So that is why we are concerned that, even though there are cost savings associated with LED lighting, that the lumens that they produce is not being considered in many of these discussions. So that has to be a carefully considered aspect to city lighting. As far as good light, bad light, just drive into Dexter. The Chevrolet dealership has its nice bright lighting, but the village, now town of Dexter, has seen fit to put the Acorn lights around the perimeter of it just in case there isn't enough light at the dealership. So there's an example again of poor lighting. So again, any consideration you give to the new kind of lighting that you might be putting in the city of Ann Arbor, and I must commend Ann Arbor for having such a commission because I don't see it in a number of communities. So it's great that you do have these environmental concerns. Any input you can do to correct the problem is greatly appreciated, so
How
appreciate
about
the time.
Eastern? Have you had any luck in the university?
You would have to ask me that. They just saw fit to put in 100, at a cost of $750,000, 100 new acorn-style fixtures with black caps on the top that are very glare-prone, and I am absolutely exasperated. In fact, I'm a little late to get back to our observatory, and we see the effects right below us. And our regents saw fit to put these in recently without considering our physics department, where we would have gladly told them to put in the kind of lights that she suggested. So we lose battles, we win battles, and it's, business by business. And what we really need in this state is a statewide mandate, like certain states, Connecticut, New Mexico, Arizona, where it's a statewide mandate to be considerate to this effect, and not just community by community. So, again, appreciate the time. And
I was hoping we could use it as an example to the
yeah, well, for
guys
a
up the
long
street
time,
here.
we did practice what we preach. We had full cutoff lighting, but out of the blue, in response to certain recent events, they put in this new lighting and didn't consider the issues that they would produce. And unfortunately, they chose the wrong kind of lights. Like I say, it's exasperating. I literally cried when I saw the new lights going in. It's that bad. So
Keep
it
up the
does
good
hurt.
fight.
Yeah.
It's really unfortunate that more light
Right.
is always considered safer.
Yes.
And you have the utility companies
Yeah.
saying more light is safer because they sell more electricity.
Yeah.
And yet, as your slideshow demonstrated, more light isn't necessarily better.
Yeah.
And it may just give those bad people better lighting to do what they do.
Right.
So we are working on the education front, but again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have to get to the observatory, so.
Okay. Seeing no other public input, items for the next agenda.
Talk to Commissioner Mursky about metrics update and kind of rolling that in with the millage information news. And
Yes.
some discussion, I think, at the next work session around that would be warranted, so.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The intent is hopefully at the working session to take the recommendations from the metric subcommittee and actually then implement them. So we have recommendations. Do we accept them? If we do accept them, how do we set targets? Are the targets already out there? Do we set them ourselves? In some cases, we may have to recommend some that potentially go to council. Who's responsible and accountable for them? All these kinds of things need to be discussed. So I had an email exchange with Wayne. Sarah, hopefully you can be there at that meeting. When is the working session meeting again? It's on?
Second Tuesday.
Yeah.
So it's still second Tuesday.
Yep.
Yep.
So we didn't really say anything about the millage, but
Yes.
it's wonderful that the millage passed, and there's potentially a large sum of money to be used for energy efficiency and such within the city, but we need to discuss what we need to do to make sure that that happens.
Yeah.
Because, and certainly those of you who are in certain wards, I would recommend talking to your council people to try and make sure that they follow through on the intent that was passed in July. We have a little bit different makeup of city council, and so that things may be a little bit more at risk. And so we need to actually do some personal input to these people and make sure that they're on board so that the money actually gets directed where it was intended.
If I can piggyback on that statement, it behooves us to work directly through staff and the administrator. So when the budget is drafted, it's in the draft. And it doesn't get to a point where council is left with a bunch of options and redirects it. I mean, obviously, there's going to be budget working session meetings like they have every year, but if we can influence what goes into that meeting, we're a lot more likely to come out with what we propose and what was accepted by the administrator and approved by council with its old composition. So we really should make sure we're in part of the upfront process. And we have a meeting, I think, in about a week or two to start talking about how we indeed do that.
Correct. And we did get positive response from the administrator in the meeting that we had before the millage was passed.
Correct.
Yes, we
And
did.
so it is very hopeful that it'll move ahead the way we had hoped. If there's nothing else for the new agenda, I will call this meeting adjourned at 16 minutes to 8.